Chapter 1, The Arrival. Nestled deep within the woods, Hollow Oak Manor stood silent and imposing. For years, it had been abandoned, its windows darkened, and its doors tightly shut. The townsfolk whispered about the strange occurrences that had once plagued the mansion, but no one dared to venture near, until the day the new owners arrived. The Fletchers, a family of 3, were thrilled to escape the city's hustle and bustle. They had purchased the manor at a suspiciously low price, ignoring the warnings of the locals. Little did they know, the house came with a condition: a housekeeper, Mr. Gorman, who had tended to the manor for as long as anyone could remember. Mr. Gorman was a gaunt, elderly man with a stooped posture and a voice that sent shivers down one's spine. His face was pale, and his eyes, though cloudy, seemed to pierce through the darkness with an unsettling clarity. He greeted the Fletchers with a hollow smile, his bony fingers wrapped around the handle of his cane. "I am the keeper of this house," Mr. Gorman said in a voice that echoed through the empty halls. "The house has its ways, and it is my duty to ensure that those who live here abide by its rules." The Fletchers exchanged uneasy glances, but they dismissed their doubts as mere superstition. They were eager to settle into their new home, unaware of the dark secrets that lay hidden within its walls. Chapter 2, The Strange Occurrences. The first few days passed without incident. The manor was grand, with vast rooms and ornate furnishings, though a thick layer of dust covered everything. Mrs. Fletcher busied herself with cleaning, while Mr. Fletcher explored the property. Their daughter, Emily, was the first to notice the oddities. It started with whispers in the night, faint and indistinct, as if the walls themselves were speaking. Emily would wake up to find her toys rearranged or her bedroom door slightly ajar, even though she was certain she had closed it before bed. When she told her parents, they brushed it off as her imagination running wild in the unfamiliar surroundings. But the strange occurrences didn't stop. The lights would flicker at odd intervals, and shadows seemed to dance on the walls. Mr. Fletcher noticed that certain rooms were always cold, no matter how warm the weather outside. And Mrs. Fletcher began hearing footsteps behind her when she was alone, though she never saw anyone there. The only person who seemed unaffected was Mr. Gorman, who went about his duties with an eerie calm. He would appear suddenly, always knowing when something was amiss, his presence both reassuring and unsettling. He warned the Fletchers not to disturb certain parts of the house, particularly the attic, which he claimed was not for the living. Chapter 3, The Unveiling. One stormy night, the power went out, plunging the manor into darkness. The Fletchers huddled together in the living room, their nerves frayed by the constant sense of unease that had settled over the house. Mr. Gorman, carrying a single candle, appeared in the doorway. "The house is restless tonight," he murmured, his eyes glinting in the candlelight. "It is best you stay close." But curiosity got the better of Mr. Fletcher. Determined to get to the bottom of the strange occurrences, he ventured up to the attic despite Mr. Gorman's warnings. The door creaked open, revealing a dusty, cobweb-covered room filled with forgotten relics. In the center of the attic stood an old, ornate mirror, its surface covered by a tattered sheet. As Mr. Fletcher approached, the sheet slipped off, revealing the mirror's glass. But the reflection was not of the attic, it was of a different place entirely, a place of shadow and mist. And in that reflection, he saw figures moving, their faces twisted in silent screams. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind him, and the mirror began to glow with an otherworldly light. Mr. Fletcher felt a cold hand on his shoulder, and he turned to see Mr. Gorman standing there, his face devoid of its usual calm. "You shouldn't have come here," Mr. Gorman whispered, his voice echoing with a sinister tone. "The house has chosen you." Chapter 4, The Escape. Downstairs, Mrs. Fletcher and Emily waited anxiously for Mr. Fletcher's return, but he never came back. The house seemed to grow colder, the shadows longer, as the minutes stretched into hours. When they finally worked up the courage to search for him, they found the attic door locked, and no amount of force could budge it. Mr. Gorman appeared once more, his demeanor now more menacing than ever. "He is part of the house now," he said, his voice filled with a strange satisfaction. "As you all will be, in time." But Emily, clutching a small, silver locket she had found earlier, felt a surge of defiance. She had seen the inscription on the locket, a name she didn't recognize, yet it felt familiar. With a burst of courage, she held the locket up to Mr. Gorman, who recoiled as if struck. "Leave us alone!" Emily shouted, her voice trembling with fear and determination. Mr. Gorman's form began to waver, his once solid figure now flickering like a dying flame. The house seemed to groan in response, the walls shaking as if in protest. But the locket's power held, and with a final, agonized scream, Mr. Gorman dissolved into nothingness, his presence vanishing as suddenly as it had appeared. Chapter 5: The Aftermath. The next morning, the storm had passed, and the house was eerily quiet. The attic door was open, but there was no sign of Mr. Fletcher or Mr. Gorman. The mirror was gone, leaving behind only an empty frame. The Fletchers quickly packed their belongings and left Hollow Oak Manor, never looking back. The house was once again abandoned, left to the elements and whatever dark forces still lingered within its walls. The townsfolk noted the Fletchers' departure with grim satisfaction, knowing that the house had claimed another family. But they also noticed that the strange O.C.